Danny's hands were blue when the cowboy found him digging through a freezing scrap bin behind Murphy's store. His little sister lay limp in their mother's arms, breaths thin as thread, the storm clawing at all three of them like the night had decided they weren't meant to see morning. Townsfolk didn't offer help. They offered distance and shame. Until the stranger stepped into the snow and said 7 words that changed everything. "Pack your things. We're going home." But what none of them knew, not the widow, not the children, not even the cowboy, was that someone in town wanted them gone for a reason buried under a collapsed mine and a corpse staged as suicide. By the time the torches came crawling up the ridge, it was already too late to run. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. What happens next will break you before it heals you. Snow blew sideways across Stillwater Ridge, the kind of needle-cold wind that made a man think the Lord was testing who deserved to stand when Christmas morning came. Caleb Thornton shoved through the alley behind Murphy's storage shed, jaw tight against the gust, meaning only to cut across toward the livery. But the sound stopped him. A thin cough. Then another, too small to belong to any grown soul. He lifted the lantern. The yellow circle of light shook over stacked crates, frozen mud, and a cracked door hanging crooked from one hinge. Something moved inside, just a shadow at first. Then the shape of a boy crouched low, shoulders hunched like he carried more weight than the Lord ever meant for a child. Danny Hayes pushed a crumb of hard biscuit across the dirt. "Emma, you eat it," he whispered. "Mama says I ate already." He hadn't. It was plain as scripture. The girl beside him, Emma, no more than 4, only shook her head and nudged it back with a trembling hand. Her breath came thin and white. Her little coat was patched more than cloth. Caleb stepped inside before he could think better of it. "Son." Danny jerked up, wild-eyed, arms spread as if he could shield his sister with that small frame. Caleb raised one hand, not apologizing, just letting the boy see he meant no harm. "Where's your mama?" Eleanor Hayes knelt in the dark behind them, back straight though she was shaking, a threadbare shawl pulled tight over her hair. A Bible page peeked from her coat pocket, edges worn soft. She had been praying. He could feel it like heat still hanging in the air. "I'm here," she said, voice raw. "Please don't. We'll be gone soon." Caleb looked from her cracked boots to the plate of scraps beside her. Potato skins, crusts, a strip of fat not worth frying. Lord above. "You call this supper?" Before she could answer, the shed door slammed wide. Cold light sliced in. Murphy filled the doorway, chewed tobacco bulging in his cheek. "Told you, widow. I don't run a charity. My boys caught you, sniffing around the bins again." Eleanor rose halfway, pulling the children behind her. "We paid what we owed." Murphy snorted. "You owe more. Husband of yours was a thief. You think the town forgot? Scraps is all you get." Caleb's throat tightened. He knew that tone. Knew what it did to people who already had nothing left to lose. He stepped forward, boots grinding on the frozen dirt. "How much?" Murphy blinked. "What?" "You said she owes." Caleb's voice didn't rise, didn't wobble. "How much?" Murphy finally grinned, the kind of grin a man learned from kicking dogs. $300, and that's me being generous." Eleanor stiffened. "Mr. Thornton, no, please." Caleb didn't look at her. He unbuttoned his coat, drew out a leather pouch, and counted the bills straight into Murphy's palm. Slow, audible, each slap of paper against skin loud as a hammer in the cold. Murphy's grin faltered. 300, Caleb said. Paid, in front of a witness. Danny stared at the money like it was fire. Emma pressed her face into Eleanor's skirt, coughing. Caleb slid the pouch back into his coat. Pack your things, he said quietly. We're going home. Eleanor's breath caught. We don't have a home. I do. Move. The boy swallowed. Mr. Thornton, Mama said we ain't charity. Good, Caleb answered. Because I don't give any. Eleanor hesitated one heartbeat too long. Emma coughed again, harder, and nearly folded over. That decided it. She gathered the few belongings, blanket, Bible page, Danny's little wooden spoon, and followed Caleb out into the wind. Murphy leaned on the doorframe. Thornton, you take trash in, you get stink for free. Caleb didn't turn. Gentlemen of your sort taught me that the day I buried my little sister. Murphy spat. They reached the wagon waiting in the alley. Caleb lifted Emma first, settling her near the front, where the lantern heat could reach her. Danny climbed in next, clutching a ragged bit of red scarf. Eleanor stepped up last. Her jaw worked once as if swallowing her pride cost more than any cold ever could. She sat with her children, arms wrapped around them both. Caleb took the reins. Wind shoved at his coat. Snow stung his eyes. Hold tight, he said. We move before the Lord closes the sky for the night. The wagon lurched forward. Wheels groaned across the frozen ruts. Behind them, Stillwater Ridge shrank to a smear of lanterns and smoke. Danny shifted in the back. Mr. Thornton? A tiny coin pressed against Caleb's elbow. It's all we got left. Mama says we don't take without giving back. Caleb took the coin without looking, then reached behind, sliding it into the pocket of the boy's coat, where he'd find it later. Quiet. Proper. Keep it, son, he said. Storm's coming. And it was. Snow rolled in fast, burying the road. Ahead in a white wall, the kind that tested bone, faith, and every promise a man dared speak aloud in the season when Christ was born. And the night was just beginning. The wind worsened before they cleared the ridge. It came hard from the north, straight from the high country, blowing drifts across the narrow road like white curtains pulled by an angry hand. Caleb hunched over the reins, watching the sky more than the trail. Storm clouds pressed low, dragging the last of the daylight with them. Behind him, Emma coughed again. Not the thin cough from earlier. This one scraped. He flicked the reins. Stay close to your mama, sweetheart. Danny wrapped both arms around his sister, pulling the thin blanket tighter. Stillwater Ridge's main street lay to their right, glowing faint through the snow. Doors slammed shut. Lamps were smothered. Folks knew better than to linger in a storm this sharp. One didn't. Murphy barreled through the saloon door, boots staggering in fresh mud, coat half-buttoned like he'd jumped up from a warm poker table. Thornton, he hollered. You think 300 covers a year of charity? You owe... Caleb stopped the wagon just long enough to look him dead in the eye. Paid, he said. Debt's closed. Murphy stomped through the snow toward the wagon. You walk out with them, folks'll talk. You hear me? They'll say the widow got her claws in you same way she did her. Caleb dropped to the ground. Boots hit hard. The wind caught his coat, snapping it behind him like a dark wing. He didn't shout, didn't curse. He just stepped close enough that Murphy tasted the cold coming off his coat. Say one more word about the children, Caleb murmured, and I'll wash your mouth with the same snow you've been feeding them. Murphy's jaw twitched. For a second, the man looked like he might swing. But a wagon load of townsfolk passed behind them, eyes wide, seeing the truth of things. Children in rags, a widow shaking, Emma barely upright. Murphy backed off, spitting brown into the snow. You'll regret it, Thornton. Town always remembers the woman you choose. He slammed the saloon door behind him. Caleb climbed back onto the wagon. You all right, ma'am? Eleanor didn't look at him. You shouldn't have paid anything. The debt was lies. Everyone in that town knows it. Doesn't matter, he said. Your boy and girl need it out. My name, she whispered, voice dull as sleet, will ruin your reputation. They'll twist the truth. They always do. Caleb flicked the reins. Let 'em talk. The wagon groaned forward. Snow deepened around the wheels, filling prints as fast as they made them. The horses fought for footing, hooves slipping on frost-glazed rock. Caleb steadied them with short commands. Easy. Pull left. Straighten. His breath fogged the air in tight bursts. Danny leaned forward. Mr. Thornton, Mama said we'd be all right on our own. Caleb didn't glance back. She was wrong this once. Eleanor stiffened. She wasn't used to being spoken to without apology, but she said nothing, arms tightening around Emma as the girl wheezed lightly against her. The trail pitched downward. Snow swirled deeper, erasing distance. Caleb traced the line of the ridge with his eyes. Something wasn't right. Storm's coming faster than it should, he said. How do you know? Eleanor asked. He nodded toward the treetops, whipping far harder than the wind near the ground. When branches move harder than the snow hits, the heart of the storm's close. Another 100 yards. Another cough from Emma. Wet this time. We'll be home before, he began. The right wheel dropped, hard. The wagon lurched sideways as if yanked by an invisible hand. Snow exploded upward. The horses screamed and scrambled. Caleb yanked the reins. Ho, ho! But the wagon had already slipped into a hidden drift. Beneath that drift, a rut swallowed half the wheel. The axle cracked with a splintering pop. Eleanor clutched the children. Danny slid but caught the seat rail. The wagon finally stopped at a sick angle, front right corner half buried. Caleb jumped down. Ice crunched under his boots as he crouched by the wheel. A crack ran clean across the spokes. Axle bent. Snow filling fast. No fixing it in freezing wind. No daylight left to spare. He stood up slow, breath harsh. Mr. Thornton? Danny's small voice wavered. Caleb didn't sugarcoat. We walk from here. Eleanor stared, pale beneath the lantern glow. In this storm? Emma can't. She can't stay either, Caleb said. Not if you want her alive come morning. He unhitched the horses, slapped their flanks, sent them running toward home. They knew the path better than any man. Their shapes vanished into the white. Eleanor's hands shook. No wagon, no shelter. We move now. Caleb reached up, lifting Emma gently. Her small head lolled against his shoulder. Take the boy. Stay close behind me." Danny scrambled down, slipping once before Eleanor steadied him. Caleb wrapped his coat tighter around the girl, shoulders braced against the freezing blast. "Mr. Thornton," Danny said, stepping close, "how far is your place?" Caleb glanced at the sky, the last sliver of daylight sinking behind jagged pines. "Farther than I'd like, so." "Closer than dying out here." He turned toward the white void swallowing the road. "Follow my steps," he told them. And then he moved, each footprint a command, each breath a prayer whispered into a storm big enough to swallow the whole frontier. And the storm answered by taking the rest of the light. Wind slammed into them the moment Caleb stepped away from the wrecked wagon. Not a gentle sweep, not a passing gust. This was the push of a storm born mean, rolling straight off the high passes with the speed of a thrown hammer. Snow spun sideways, needling his cheeks, clinging to Emma's hair as she breathed weak against his shoulder. "Stay on my heels," he said. Eleanor gathered Danny close and followed, skirts snapping like torn flags. She pulled her shawl over both children, but the wind ripped half of it free before she clutched it back. Danny's scarf fluttered, a small red streak in a world going white. Caleb kept his eyes low, watching the barely visible line where road met ditch. Hard to track it now. Drifts rolled over every inch, smoothing the world into nothing but blowing white. He counted his breaths, counted his steps, counted the distance in his head. The horses should reach home in minutes. He prayed they did. The lantern at the porch would be burning if the house still stood. "Mr. Thornton?" Danny called through the wind. "Talk later," Caleb said. "Breathe steady." Emma coughed again. Her body jerked in his arms, a small tremor against his chest. Caleb angled her face into his coat, blocking the wind. Too cold, too long. The storm punched harder. Snow blasted from the pines above them, falling in sheets. Caleb raised his shoulder to shield the girl and kept moving. Behind him, Eleanor stumbled. She caught herself quick, but he saw it. Her knees buckled, her breath broken. She pushed Danny ahead before she steadied herself. That small act alone told him how close she was to dropping. He slowed just enough for them to close the gap. "Keep talking," he ordered. "What?" Eleanor gasped. "Just talk. To the boy, to the girl, to the Lord. Doesn't matter. Silence'll put you on the ground." So she talked. Words half swallowed by the wind. Christmas hymns, scripture lines, anything that kept her upright. Danny answered when he could, voice thin, cracking from cold. Caleb scanned the white horizon again. No shape of house, no dark line of fence. Just storm. He pressed forward. The wind shifted west suddenly, never a good sign. "Storm's turning," he muttered, "faster than it should." Eleanor pushed the words through chattering teeth. How do you know that?" "When wind comes from two directions," he said, "storms circling you." She clutched Danny closer. Then Emma sagged in his arms. Caleb paused just long enough to adjust her weight. Her head rolled to one side. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "stay awake." She didn't answer. Only a soft, rattling exhale. Eleanor's voice cut through, sharp with fear. "Emma! Emma!" "She's breathing," Caleb said. "We get her warm. Keep moving." Another 30 yards, another breath that felt like swallowing knives. Then the ground tilted, not steep, Barely a shift, but he felt it. The slope meant something. He knew every angle on this trail like the back of his hand. "We're close," he said. "How close?" Danny yelled. "Close enough to stand if we keep walking." He scanned the blowing white. Nothing. Then, faint, he saw it. A post. Just one. Barely a darker blur in the storm. One of his fence markers. The storm swallowed it every other second. But it was there. "Fence line," he said. "That's my land." Danny exhaled like someone pulled a knife out of his ribs. Eleanor nearly collapsed again, catching herself by bracing a hand against his back. "Lord Jesus, thank you," she whispered. But relief was a dangerous thing in a storm this cruel. The next gust came sideways and harder than any before. Eleanor staggered. Her boot slipped. For one awful second, she fought the wind with Emma's shawl in one hand and Danny's arm in the other. Then her legs gave. Caleb spun fast enough that snow kicked up around his boots. He lunged, grabbed her coat, yanked her upright before she hit the drift. Her knees buckled again, but he tightened his grip and hauled her close. "You fall," he said, voice hard as frozen oak. "Your children die with you. On your feet." Her breath shuddered, white in the air. She nodded once, small but steady. Danny pressed his face into her hip, holding on. "Mr. Thornton," the boy said, "Mama's tired." "I know," he said. "She keeps walking anyway." Eleanor forced one foot ahead, then the other. Each step dragged like a stone tied to her ankle, but she didn't stop. Not with the storm clawing at their backs. Not with Emma wheezing in Caleb's arms. Wind screamed through the pines. Snow swirled thick enough to hide Caleb's outstretched hand. Every part of him burned with cold, but he lifted his chin, forcing his body forward. "Fence posts only the start," he said. "House is past the rise." "How far?" Eleanor rasped. "Far enough to matter." He saw her jaw work at that, but she kept moving. One step, one prayer, one breath. Emma whimpered faintly, head burrowing deeper into his coat. Caleb adjusted his grip, shielding her with both arms, and trudged into the storm that seemed determined to bury them whole. Behind him, Eleanor whispered another hymn, her voice small, cracked, but unbroken. Danny echoed the words, breathless, trying to match her. The storm swallowed their voices, but they kept walking, because stopping meant death, and the ridge was hungry tonight. The fence post vanished behind a wall of blowing white, but Caleb held the direction in his mind like a compass etched into bone. He shifted Emma's weight in his arms, shielding her face with his coat, as another blast hit hard enough to bow the pines. "Don't stop," he said. Not loud, just certain. Eleanor trudged behind him, Danny clinging to her skirt, the boy's scarf snapping like a torn prayer flag in the wind. Her boots punched into the drifts, sometimes sinking to the ankle, sometimes to the knee. She didn't complain. She didn't ask how much farther. She just kept moving, breath breaking, shoulders shaking under the weight of 2 children and 1 storm. A hollow groan rolled across the ridge, a sound like timber straining before a break. Caleb froze. That was no wind. That was something giving way. The next gust tore open the storm's veil just long enough for him to see it. The wagon, half buried behind them, listing deeper into the snowdrift it had slipped into. The cracked axle hung like a snapped limb. If they'd stayed even a minute longer, The whole thing would have toppled and buried them. He pushed forward harder. Then the wind shifted again, west to north, sharper, colder, slicing straight through coats and skin. Snow grains stung his jaw like thrown gravel. He angled his body, taking the brunt so Eleanor and the children could walk in the slipstream behind him. Danny called out, voice thin, "Mr. Thornton, Mama's slowing." Caleb stopped just long enough to turn. Eleanor's head dipped low, shoulders sagging. Her hands held Danny tight, but her fingers were white, beyond numb. "Ma'am," he said, "give me the boy." She shook her head, jaw clenched. "I can carry. He walks faster with me." It wasn't up for debate. She nodded once, barely, and let Danny stumble from her arms. Caleb crouched so the boy could climb up along his side. With Emma already swaddled against his chest, he took Danny's wrist and pulled him to stand between his arm and ribs, bracing both children with the strength of a man who'd already buried too many young. "Hold on, son," he said. Danny's fingers locked around his coat. Caleb rose and pushed forward again. Wind shoved them sideways. Snow poured from the branches above, burying their footprints almost as soon as they made them. Eleanor pressed her palm flat against Caleb's back to anchor herself, following his steps exactly the way he told her. Another 100 feet. Another blast. Then the land dipped again, just enough for Caleb to recognize where the slope turned toward the open stretch that led to his home. "We're close," he said. Eleanor didn't answer. She was too busy staying upright. Emma whimpered in his coat. Her breath rattled shallow. Not good. Not long left. "We move faster," Caleb said. He adjusted his grip on the children, bent forward into the gale, and trudged with renewed force through snow that reached his shins, then his knees, then nearly his thigh. Behind him, Eleanor slipped, hard. Her knee hit the snow with a muffled thud. She tried to stand. Her legs didn't obey. Caleb planted his boots and turned fully toward her. "Ma'am, up." She swallowed. "Just 1 second." "You don't have one." She bowed her head, breath shaking. Danny pressed his forehead into Caleb's coat, silently begging him to fix what he couldn't. Caleb stepped forward. He didn't scold, didn't soften. He simply reached down, took Eleanor's forearm, and pulled her to her feet with a force that left no room for her to fall again. "You stop," he said, low and firm. "Your children freeze. Now walk." Her breath broke on a sob she didn't allow out. She nodded and followed. The storm snarled around them. The forest bent under its weight. But step by step, they carved a crooked path through the white, Caleb carrying 2 children, Eleanor fighting the cold that wanted her as much as it wanted them. Minutes blurred into more minutes. The storm didn't ease, but then Caleb saw it. A darker line in the white. Fence rail. Another. Then another. "Home," he muttered. He didn't let himself slow. Not yet. If he stopped now, the fatigue in his bones might take him to his knees. He pushed through the final stretch, boots dragging in deep drifts. At last, the faint silhouette of his cabin took shape, a low, sturdy outline against the storm, its porch lamp glowing dim through the blowing snow like a candle set in the window for strays on Christmas Eve. Eleanor sagged, a gasp torn from her throat. Danny lifted his head, eyes wide. Caleb tightened his grip on both children. "Almost there," he said. "Don't fall." He trudged the last yards, the storm clawing at their backs. The porch steps rose from the snow like a promise handed down straight from the Lord. He mounted them in 3 brutal strides, boots thudding on wood. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Warmth, thin but real, leaked into the storm. He carried the children inside. Eleanor followed, staggering across the threshold, and the door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the storm's roar like the Lord himself had laid a hand upon it. They had made it. For now. Cold swallowed the room the moment the door slammed, as if the storm outside clawed for one last grip on them. Caleb didn't waste breath shutting it tight. He turned straight toward the hearth, dropped to one knee, and laid Emma on a folded blanket in front of the stove. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he murmured, checking her breath with the back of his hand. A thin rattle rose in her throat. He didn't like that sound, didn't like how light she felt in his arms. Behind him, Eleanor staggered through the doorway like a traveler crossing into holy ground. She braced one hand on the wall, fighting the tremor in her legs. Danny clung to her skirt, scarf iced stiff from the wind. "Ma'am," Caleb said, "leave the door. I've got it." She tried to nod, but her head dropped too far forward. He crossed the room in 2 strides, shut the door, and slid the heavy beam lock into place. The cabin moaned once under the force of the wind, then settled. He moved back to Emma. Her small fingers twitched, reaching for something she couldn't see. Danny dropped beside her. "Mr. Thornton, she's shaking." "I know, son." Caleb knelt, rubbing Emma's hands between his own, warming the blood back into them slow so it wouldn't burn. "She'll come around." Eleanor sank to her knees. Her breath came in jagged pulls, fogging in the air. "Is she?" "She's breathing." He looked right at her. "We get her warm steady, not fast." Eleanor nodded, though her eyes stung from more than cold. "Danny, give her your scarf." Danny unwound it quick, handing it over without question. Eleanor wrapped it around Emma's neck, tucking the ends under the blanket. The girl whimpered. Eleanor leaned over her daughter, lips moving in a broken prayer. Not loud, not for show, just a mother asking the Lord to let this child stay. Caleb pushed to his feet. "I'll check the stove." The fire was low. He'd left it that way when he rode into town that morning, but the embers glowed warm enough to build on. He shoveled kindling with practiced speed, added split wood, and coaxed the flames higher with one breath, then another. Heat rose in a sigh. He returned to the family on the floor. "Danny," Caleb said, "come here." The boy scrambled to his side. Caleb took Danny's hands between his palms. "Can you feel your fingers?" "A little," Danny said. "They hurt." "That means they're waking up." Caleb rubbed them gently until the color returned. "Good. Sit close to the stove. Keep Mama warm." Eleanor looked up. "I'm fine." "You're not." Caleb's voice wasn't harsh, just true. "Your legs gave out on the ridge. You sit. Now." She pressed her lips together, half pride, half stubbornness, but she obeyed. Danny helped her scoot closer to the heat. Her skirt steamed lightly as the frost melted from its edges. Caleb returned to Emma. He lifted her just enough to adjust the blanket, cradling, her head in his palm. Her breathing steadied. but not enough. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "you hold on." Her lashes fluttered. Just once. He'd take it. Eleanor's voice trembled. "Mr. Thornton, what if the storm trapped us out there? If you hadn't come back?" Caleb didn't answer that. There wasn't a good answer to give. He turned to Danny instead. "Son, fetch that tin cup on the shelf." Danny jumped up, eager to be useful. He grabbed the cup and handed it over. Caleb filled it with warm, not hot, water from the kettle. "Emma," he whispered, brushing her cheek with a thumb. "Just a sip." He tipped the cup carefully to her lips. Water touched. Her mouth twitched. She swallowed. A breath Caleb hadn't realized he was holding loosened in his chest. "See?" he said softly. "She's fighting." Behind him, Eleanor reached for his arm, just barely touching the coat sleeve before pulling her hand back like she'd touched flame. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb didn't turn, didn't say anything, but his jaw worked once. Outside, wind clawed at the cabin. Snow hammered the shutters. The storm wasn't done with them yet. It wanted its due. Danny shifted closer. "Mr. Thornton, how long till she gets better?" Caleb looked at the fire, then at the tiny girl breathing shallow under the blanket. "Depends," he said. "Cold gets into the lungs. We'll see a fever by night." "Tonight?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "Maybe." He stood, listening to the wind shake the chimney pipe. "But she's warm now. That's the first battle." Eleanor pressed Emma tighter. "And the second?" Caleb met her eyes. "The Lord willing, she'll see morning." A long moment passed, the kind carved from fear and hope stitched together. Then Emma coughed again, softer than before, but real. Danny's eyes lit. "Mama, she moved." Caleb knelt again, checking her breath. Slow, thin, but steady. "That's right, sweetheart," he murmured. "You stay with us." He looked toward the shuttered windows. Storm still howling. Night coming fast. They weren't out of danger. Far from it. But they were inside. Alive. Together. And for just one fleeting moment, that felt like a miracle. The kind men remember when Christmas snow falls heavier than it should. Caleb set another log on the fire, watching the flame catch slow. Too fast, and the heat would shock the children's lungs. Too slow and cold would keep its claws in them. Everything tonight had to walk a narrow line, same as the ridge outside. He turned back. Emma lay curled beneath the blanket, tiny shoulders rising in shallow lifts. Danny sat cross-legged beside her, rubbing his hands together like Caleb had taught. Slow, steady, wake the blood, don't rush it. Eleanor hovered close, trying not to touch the stove even though her skirt steamed from melting frost. Caleb crouched beside Emma again. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "open your eyes for me." Her lashes fluttered. Not fully, but enough. "That's it." He tipped another spoonful of warm water to her lips. She swallowed, barely. Behind him, Eleanor whispered, "Bless you, Lord." So soft it might have been breath. Caleb stood. "Danny, you stay near the heat. Don't lean too close. Stove's hotter than it looks." "Yes, sir." Eleanor tried to rise. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the table. Caleb crossed the room, quick but controlled. "Sit," he said, "before you fall." "I need to. You need to breathe," he answered. No edge, no softness, just truth. She sat, shoulders slumped, hands trembling in her lap. Not from fear, from cold finally giving up its grip. Caleb grabbed a second blanket from the trunk near the wall and tossed it over her shoulders. She pulled it close, eyes shining with something she didn't let fall. Outside, the wind struck the shutters again, rattling the boards. Danny flinched. Caleb didn't. "It's just the storm," Caleb said. "House is built to hold." "Did you build it yourself?" Danny asked. Caleb nodded. Every beam. Danny looked at the walls differently then, as if strength could pass from timber into bone. He shifted closer to his mother, leaning his small frame against her arm. Eleanor pulled him close, the blanket making a tent around them both. Caleb moved around the cabin, checking each shutter, each latch, not because he doubted the house, but because checking was what kept a man alive in winters like this. As he passed the shelf, he caught sight of the small wooden spoon Eleanor had carried from the shed. He didn't touch it, but he noted it. People who carried their past in their pockets didn't do it for show. They did it because they were holding the only things the world hadn't taken. "Mama," Danny whispered, "can we stay awake with her till she's better?" Eleanor brushed his hair back. "We'll stay as long as we have to." Caleb returned to the hearth. The fire had grown stronger, licking at the fresh log with orange edges. "We'll make it through the night," he said, mostly to himself. "We have to." Eleanor lifted her head. "For Emma, yes." "For all of you," he said. She blinked, thrown off for half a second. He didn't look at her again. Instead, he prepared the small space for a long night, refilling the kettle, laying out more blankets, checking the coals. Every movement quiet, efficient. The kind of work a man learned from too many nights like this. Some he survived, some he didn't. A soft thud stopped him. Eleanor's eyes had closed. Her head drifted sideways, chin dropping toward her chest. Caleb walked over and shook his head once. "Ma'am." Her eyes snapped open, guilt flooding in even though he'd said nothing. "You sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." "I can't." "Your girl needs you clear come morning. Rest while you can." She hesitated, then nodded, exhaustion pulling her under. Danny curled against her under the blanket, small hand gripping her sleeve. Caleb knelt again beside Emma. He checked her pulse. Not strong, but present. Her breath was thin, shorter than it had been. He placed his hand near her mouth, counting seconds between breaths, too far apart. He leaned closer. "Stay with us, sweetheart." Her brow twitched. He sat there longer than he should have, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the stove groan as the storm battered the house. He was not a man given to prayer, not anymore. But he bowed his head, breath catching once in his throat. "Lord," he whispered into the firelight, "don't let this one slip." Outside, snow sheared off the roof in heavy blankets. The storm howled like a wounded beast. But inside, the cabin held, warmth pushing back the cold inch by inch, the way a man rebuilt life one stubborn heartbeat at a time. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Storms like this stole all sense of time. Emma stirred, just barely. Caleb leaned in. Good girl. Her breathing steadied, still shallow, still too quick, but steadier than before. He exhaled slow, rising to his feet to check the shutters again. The storm wasn't done, but neither were they. Night pressed harder on the cabin walls, and the first real battle, for breath, for warmth, for life, had only just begun. Morning didn't break so much as seep into the cabin. Thin gray light pressed through the seams of the shutters. Caleb had been awake the whole night, keeping the stove fed, counting Emma's breaths, fighting every instinct that told him she was slipping too far, too fast. When the first weak beam of dawn reached the floorboards, he finally exhaled. Not relief, just acknowledgement that another battle was coming. Emma stirred. A faint whimper left her lips. Then a cough, sharp, wet, wrong. Caleb's jaw tightened. There it is. Danny jerked awake beside her. Mr. Thornton? She's worse? We'll handle it, Caleb said. Bring me the kettle. Danny scrambled up, legs stiff from cold, and lifted the metal pot with both hands. Caleb poured a small cup, checked the temperature with his wrist, and leaned over the girl. Sweetheart, he murmured, sip what you can. She swallowed a few drops, but her breath rattled deeper this time. A heat began to rise under her skin, the dangerous kind, the kind that climbed fast once it started. Behind him, Eleanor blinked awake. She tried to sit up too quickly and nearly fell sideways. Caleb caught her with one hand. Easy, he said. Her eyes darted to Emma. How long has she? Fever hit before dawn, he answered, voice flat, steady. We keep things measured. You hear me? Eleanor nodded, though her throat bobbed with fear she didn't voice. She reached for her girl, but Caleb lifted a hand. Not yet. Your hands are cold. Warm them first. She pressed her palms near the stove. Danny, boy, fetch that rag. Danny hurried, handing over the cloth. Eleanor dabbed Emma's forehead. Slow circles. Nothing rushed. Caleb watched the motion, approving the care but tracking the fever rising under the girl's skin. He turned to the shelf, grabbed a jar of honey and a small lemon he'd saved from the last trader run. Danny watched him mix it into a tin cup. Will that help her? Helps the throat breathe easier, Caleb said. Keeps her drinking. He knelt again, tipped a spoonful toward Emma. She drank, barely, but she drank. Eleanor closed her eyes in a prayer as soft as the steam rising from the cup. Then Danny's stomach growled, loud, ugly loud. The boy clutched his middle, eyes wide like he'd done something wrong. Sorry. That's good, Caleb cut in. Means you're alive. He pointed to the bowl of oats on the table. Eat. Danny hesitated. But then, what if there's not enough for later? Caleb stood, voice firm. Son, listen close. Food ain't for saving. Food's for living. You eat now, you got strength. You save it, you starve twice. Danny swallowed hard, nodded, and went to eat. Slow at first, then faster, after he dared to believe that bowl was really for him. Eleanor watched the exchange, something breaking in her posture when she saw her boy eat without fear. A mother's relief shone in the smallest drop of her shoulders. Caleb ignored the tightening in his chest and returned to the practical things, the things he could control. He checked the windows again. Snow piled high against every shutter. The storm hadn't passed. It had settled. "We'll need firewood brought inside," he said. "Storm's still stacking itself up." Eleanor straightened. "I can do—" "You're staying put," Caleb said, without turning. "Your girl needs you clear." She didn't argue. Her silence was answer enough. Danny set his empty bowl down, trying to look braver than his thin frame allowed. "Mr. Thornton, I can help." Caleb studied him for a long second, not doubting him, measuring him. He nodded. "You can. I've got a job for you." Danny's chest rose. "What is it?" "You're feeding the horses. They made it back last night. They need care same as anyone." Eleanor's head snapped up. "It's too cold." "He'll be quick," Caleb said. "And it's work a boy can manage. Work that matters." Danny squared his shoulders, small but steady. "I'll do it." Caleb grabbed his spare coat from the peg and draped it over the boy's shoulders. The coat swallowed him whole, but warmth didn't care about size. "Stay by the barn wall," Caleb said. "Keep your head down. Come right back after the feed." Danny nodded hard. Caleb opened the door only a crack, just enough for the boy to squeeze through. A blast of white wind punched into the cabin, scattering ash from the hearth. Danny vanished into the storm. Eleanor clutched the blanket tighter around Emma. "Are you sure?" "He needs to walk," Caleb said. "He's been surviving too long. Now he needs to stand." It wasn't softness. It wasn't sentiment. It was survival training, passed from one life-hardened man to a boy who deserved a chance. He checked the stove, fed the fire, listened to Emma's breathing again. Too shallow, too tight, too fast. Eleanor's voice trembled. "Mr. Thornton, if her fever rises—" "I'll get the doctor," Caleb said. "But the storm—" "I said I'll get him." His tone ended the conversation, but the truth behind it was clear. He'd walk through hell or a worse storm than this before he let that little girl's breath fade out under his roof. Eleanor bowed her head, hand pressed to Emma's small chest, feeling each fragile rise. Minutes later, the door cracked open again. Danny burst in, snow to his knees, breath heaving, but proud. "Horses are fed," he gasped. Caleb nodded once. "Good work, son." Danny beamed through wind-burned cheeks. The storm roared outside. Emma's fever climbed another notch, and Caleb knew the next decision would cost him more than sweat. It might cost him blood. Snow still hammered the cabin walls when Caleb shut the door behind Danny's return. The boy shook like a leaf in a hard wind, but his eyes held the pride of someone who'd finally been trusted with real work. "Good," Caleb said, brushing the snow from the boy's hair with one rough swipe. "You did right." Danny straightened, small chest puffed. "The horses, they're warm. I gave them extra hay." "That's why they'll live," Caleb answered. The boy glowed at that. He'd waited a long time to be something other than a burden. Caleb hung the spare coat back on the peg, then crossed the room to check Emma again. The fever had climbed half a rung in the hours since dawn. Her cheeks flushed too red. Breath came too fast. Every inhale sounded like it stole something out of her. He didn't say anything. Not yet. He just worked. He scooped another spoonful of honey lemon, coaxed her to swallow. She did, though her lips trembled. Eleanor held her upright, whispering steady, unbroken prayers. Caleb stood and faced the cabin. They needed structure, order. Survival didn't come from hoping. It came from jobs done right. "Danny," he said, "you're on chores today." The boy blinked. "Chores?" "Everything the horses need. Keep the water from freezing. Check the stalls. Bring in wood when I say. No wandering." Danny nodded, jaw set. Eleanor looked up. "He's just a child." "Storm doesn't care," Caleb replied. "Work keeps him warm. Work keeps his mind straight. And work keeps this house standing." She didn't argue, though worry pulled at her brow. Caleb grabbed a small trunk from under the bed and slid it to the table. Inside were neatly folded linens, spare shirts, a couple dresses that had belonged to another woman long buried. He didn't look at Eleanor. He just set the trunk open. "You'll need dry clothes," he said. Her fingers hesitated over the fabric. I don't want to take anything that isn't." "It's to borrow," he cut in, "not to keep." The relief that washed through her shoulders was almost invisible, but Caleb saw it. She chose the plainest dress, brown, simple, no lace, the kind that said she wasn't asking for anything more than the right to stand on her own feet. She walked behind the partition curtain and changed. When she stepped back out, the dress hung looser than it should have, too much weight lost in too many hungry nights. But her posture had changed, straighter, firmer, like someone remembering she used to have a place in the world. She moved to the stove. "Mr. Thornton, may I cook something?" "You can." It wasn't permission. It was acknowledgement. She set to work immediately, hands steady, movements practiced. The kitchen filled with the scent of oats and broth. Not much food, but enough to keep bodies warm. Caleb went outside, just long enough to check the barn again. When he came back, the cabin smelled like hope, disguised as boiling water. Danny sat near the table, drawing with a stub of charcoal on a scrap of paper. A lopsided shape, a strange outline. Caleb stopped behind him. "What are you making?" Danny jerked the paper close. "Nothing." Caleb let it go. Kids guarded their secrets tighter than adults. Emma coughed, hard enough to fold her small body in half. Eleanor rushed to her, steadying her shoulders. Caleb stepped close again. He felt the heat radiating off the girl. Not good. Not good at all. "We'll need the doctor soon," he said. Eleanor's breath hitched. "But the storm—" "I'll handle it." His tone left no room for doubt or refusal. He checked the shutters again, bracing a loose hinge with a wedge of wood. The things he could fix, he fixed. The things he couldn't, he tracked like a wolf following blood on snow. When he sat at the table, he meant to rest for only a second. Just one breath. As he lowered himself into the chair, something bumped his boot. He frowned, looked down. A tiny wooden horse lay half hidden under the chair leg, carved by a child's hand. Uneven, but earnest. The tail scratched short, the head too big, but shaped with the kind of pride that came from giving someone the only gift you had. Caleb picked it up. Danny froze, color draining from his wind-burned cheeks. I didn't mean for you to... I just thought..." I made it last night 'cause you saved us, sir." Caleb held the horse in his palm, small enough to disappear in his fist, light enough to mean nothing, heavy enough to mean everything. He didn't thank the boy. He didn't smile. He didn't get sentimental. He just closed his fingers around the carving and set it on the shelf beside the lantern. "Good work," he said. Danny's breath left him like he'd been knighted. Eleanor watched the exchange, one hand over her mouth, understanding exactly what Caleb had done, and more importantly, what he hadn't said. Outside, the wind slammed hard against the cabin again, shaking the shutters. Emma whimpered in her fevered sleep. Caleb rose, grabbed his coat, and strapped his holster. "Storm's holding," he said, "but her fever's climbing." Eleanor's hands tightened around the blanket. "You're going for the doctor?" "Soon," Caleb said. "Before night." He opened the door, cold slicing straight through the house. "But first," he added, "I check the ridge." Danny looked up. "Why?" Caleb scanned the white world ahead. "Because trouble walks on two legs, same as hope," he said. "And either one could be heading our way." He shut the door behind him, leaving the cabin warm with firelight and fear. The storm wasn't their only enemy now. Caleb spotted the riders long before their figures sharpened through the snow haze. 5 of them. Moving slow, deliberate, like men who weren't worried about the storm or about the house they were riding toward. He stepped off the porch, boots cracking a frozen crust of snow. Didn't bother grabbing his hat. Wind ripped at his coat, but he didn't flinch. The riders halted 10 yards out. Murphy led them, face chapped raw, breath smoking in the cold. The others spread behind him, ranchmen, drovers, the kind who carried other people's grudges as if paid by the pound. "Well now," Murphy called, voice smug despite the wind. "Thornton's home after all." Caleb didn't answer. He waited. Murphy grinned wider. "Got business with you." Caleb's jaw worked. "Speak it." One of the men held up a folded contract, already damp from the storm. "We heard you were keeping questionable company out here." His gaze slid toward the house, toward the place where a sick child lay fighting to breathe. "Town's talking." Caleb didn't look back. "Town talks too much." Murphy snorted. "Then let 'em. But you're on the hook for that cattle deal, and word is, you don't need it anymore." He leaned forward on the saddle horn. "Not with strays you're taking in." Caleb stepped closer. 1 step. Slow enough not to spook the horses, sharp enough to show intent. "Say what you came to say." Murphy's grin snapped flat. "Deal's off. We're cutting it. Thornton beef ain't coming to our table if it's handled by a man keeping criminals and scavengers." He didn't spit, but the whole sentence felt like it. Caleb's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "I don't break contracts." "You don't have one anymore." One of the drovers tossed the paper. It skidded across the snow, landing at Caleb's boots. Wind snapped it open enough to show the signature line, his name scratched over in pencil. Behind the nearest shutter, Eleanor watched, face pale, hands gripping the wood as if holding the wall steady. Danny crouched behind her, eyes wide. Emma slept fitful, breath whistling thin. Caleb didn't pick up the paper. "Drive your cattle somewhere else," Murphy said. "Or don't drive 'em at all. Winter's long. Mistakes get folks killed." It wasn't a warning. It was a threat with a smile. Caleb took one more step. Men behind Murphy shifted, horses stamping. "You done?" Caleb asked. Murphy shrugged. "Nearly. Got one more thing." His gaze flicked to the house again. "That widow. She's nothing but trouble. You'd do well to throw her back where you found her." Danny's breath hitched behind the shutter. Caleb didn't blink. Murphy lifted his chin. "Well, you gonna keep playing hero? Or you gonna choose your own hide?" Caleb's voice came low. "My hide ain't what's in danger." Murphy stiffened. "That a threat?" Caleb didn't bother answering. The wind answered for him, slamming a gust so hard it rattled the porch boards. Murphy yanked his reins. "Deal's off. Spread the word, boys. Thornton's ranch is closed for business." They turned, snow spraying behind them like dust from a busted trail. Caleb watched until they vanished into the white. Only then did he kneel, pick up the ruined contract, fold it cleanly, and slip it inside his coat. Savings gone. Winter stores cut short. Feed costs tripled. Didn't matter. The only calculation that mattered came from a single weak cough behind the door. He walked back to the cabin. Eleanor met him at the threshold, face tight. I heard," she whispered. "It's because of us. We shouldn't be here. We should leave before—" "You ain't going anywhere," Caleb said. "You lost your contract. I lost a sale." His voice stayed cold steel. "Not my sense. It's not fair to you. World's not fair to children either," he answered. "Still don't make me throw 'em out in the snow." Her mouth opened, shut. Words tangled somewhere between fear and pride. Danny stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, I can help. I'll work more. Caleb raised a hand. "Not your burden, son." That son landed heavy. Eleanor heard it. So did the boy. Then Emma coughed again, harder, deeper. The sound sliced through the room like something tearing. Eleanor dropped to her knees beside the child. "Emma, Emma, breathe for me." Caleb moved fast, checking her pulse, tilting her upright. The fever now burned off her skin. Her breath rasped thin, chest rattling. Too fast, too hot, too close to the line. Caleb stood. Eleanor grabbed his coat sleeve. "Where are you going?" "Town." "In this storm? Murphy's men just—" "I'm not asking them." "But the doctor, you can't force—" "I can," Caleb said. "And I will." Eleanor's voice broke. "You could get hurt. So could she." He buckled his coat, holstered his revolver, and grabbed the lantern. Danny stepped toward him. "Sir, be careful." Caleb rested a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "Keep the fire steady. Keep your mama warm." He opened the door. Wind blasted through, tearing warmth from the room in one sweep. Caleb braced himself, looked once toward the sick girl fighting for breath, and stepped into the storm without another word. The door slammed behind him. Because some nights, a man walks into the teeth of winter to bring back one doctor, or bury the alternative. Caleb hit town like a hammer through cold glass. The storm hadn't eased. Snow still whipped sideways, swallowing the street lamps whole. But he walked straight down the center of Main Street, boots cutting a path no sane man would take at twilight in weather like this. He didn't slow, didn't look at the men smoking under the awning, didn't acknowledge Murphy leaning on the railing, grin sharp as a wolf's tooth. He headed for one place only, the doctor's yellow-lit window. He pounded once, hard enough to shake frost from the frame. The door cracked open, and Doc Avery peeked out, spectacles fogged. "Thornton? In God's name, coat on," Caleb said. "Now." Avery blinked. "Someone hurt?" "Little girl, fever high, trouble breathing." The doctor hesitated. Just a heartbeat. But it was long enough for the men behind Caleb to take notice. Murphy's voice drifted across the street. "Doc, you best think careful. Thornton's house ain't exactly town-friendly tonight." Caleb turned slow, not rushed, not rattled, just slow enough to make every man on that porch straighten up. "Doctor's coming," he said. Murphy shrugged. His choice. Caleb stepped aside, giving Avery space to collect his bag. Avery's hands shook as he packed. Not from fear, he was old, tired, and storms carved more out of him each year. "Thornton, this weather. She won't last the night," Caleb said. "Neither will you if you freeze talking about it. Move." Avery swallowed, nodded, and shrugged into his coat. Murphy called after them. "Storm kills slow, Thornton. Decisions kill faster." Caleb didn't turn, didn't answer. He just took the doctor's arm and guided him into the whiteout, swallowing Main Street whole. The walk back was brutal. Wind knifed sideways, lifting sheets of snow that slapped hard enough to sting. The doctor stumbled twice. Caleb hauled him upright each time with one arm, lantern clutched in the other. "How far?" Avery gasped. "Far enough you don't stop," Caleb said. "Should have taken a horse." Storm would have taken it back. They trudged through the drifts, the lantern guttering but refusing to die. The ridge loomed invisibly ahead, but Caleb knew its shape. He followed memory the way a priest followed scripture, line for line, step for step. Halfway up the slope, the wind turned savage. A blast slammed into them, pushing Avery sideways. Caleb blocked it with his shoulder, dragging the doctor back into line. "She's a strong one," Avery muttered. "So's her fever," Caleb said. Another 20 yards. Another breath that tasted like ice. Then, finally, Caleb saw it. The faint glow of the porch lamp. A miracle in the storm. "We're here," he said. He kicked the door open with the same force as before, dragging Avery inside. Heat rushed to meet them, and Eleanor jumped to her feet, nearly dropping the rag she'd been pressing to Emma's forehead. "Doctor! Thank God, please, she's worse. She's—" Avery knelt beside the girl before she finished. He pressed a hand to her forehead, another to her chest. His brow tightened. "She's walking a hard line," he said. "How long's she been breathing like this?" "Since dawn," Caleb answered. Avery nodded grimly and opened his bag. "Boil water, tear cloth, keep the air warm, no drafts." Eleanor moved fast, too fast, and nearly collapsed. Caleb caught her elbow, steadied her, then lifted the kettle onto the stove himself. Danny hovered in the corner, fists clenched at his tongue. Avery worked quickly, checking Emma's chest, mixing powder into water, lifting her tiny frame upright so she could sip. Her breath rattled like a loose hinge. Eleanor whispered, "Emma, baby, stay with me. She can hear you," Avery said. "Keep talking." Minutes stretched into something long enough to hurt. Then Emma stirred. Not much, but enough to make Eleanor's knees buckle again. Caleb slid an arm behind her before she hit the floor. She's fighting, Avery said. But the night will test her. Keep the fire steady, no cold air, not one crack in these shutters. Caleb nodded once. Hours passed. Avery stayed until Emma's fever broke. Tiny beads of sweat forming on her nose, breath easing from a frantic rasp into a thin but steady rhythm. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the first mercy they'd had in days. When the doctor finally stood, his back cracked like dry wood. She's not out of danger, but she has a chance now. Eleanor pressed both hands over her mouth, tears sliding between her fingers. Caleb walked Avery to the door. You headin' back alone? The doctor asked. No, Caleb said. Storm's easing. I'll take you halfway. Avery nodded, but stopped when Caleb pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch. For your trouble, Caleb said. Avery shook his head. I didn't ask. I ain't paying for kindness, Caleb said. I'm paying for time. The doctor accepted. Caleb opened the door. The storm had softened to a slow drift, snow falling without fury now, just the steady quiet of winter. You'll need this, he said, and tossed Avery the cabin key. The doctor frowned. Why me? It's a spare. Caleb's jaw worked once. The woman needs to know she can lock that door behind me if she chooses. Avery looked at the key, then at Caleb. He nodded in understanding deeper than words. Caleb stepped outside with him, guiding him toward the main trail. Behind them, Eleanor picked up the key with trembling fingers, turning it over, reading everything Caleb hadn't said inside the cold brass. A choice, a barrier, a promise without a single soft word, the kind only a man with grief carved into his ribs could give. The storm died sometime before dawn, leaving the world outside smothered in white silence, the kind of quiet that made a man hear every breath inside his own walls. Caleb tightened the last shutter and turned back toward the hearth. Emma slept easier, still weak, but breathing without that knife-edge rattle. Eleanor sat behind her, one arm around the girl, the other wrapped around Danny. The key Caleb had left glinted on the table beside them. She hadn't used it. Caleb pretended not to notice. He added a log to the stove and straightened. When she wakes, she'll need broth. You rest while you can. Eleanor didn't rest. She watched him. Something turning behind her eyes, something she'd tried to outrun but for too many miles. Mr. Thornton, she whispered. There's something I need to tell you. Caleb didn't move, didn't sit. Speak it. Eleanor swallowed hard. The debt Murphy holds over me. It isn't real. Caleb's jaw flexed. Go on. It was my husband's, she said. But there was no note, no paper, nothing binding. Murphy claimed Ezra owed him for tools and supplies from the mine. But Ezra told me, days before he died, that the mine wasn't just dangerous. Her voice thinned. It was rigged. Caleb's brow lowered. Rigged how? A support beam had been cut. On purpose. She gripped her skirt. Ezra said the mine wasn't a mine at all. It was a trap to claim insurance, land rights, something bigger. He found ledgers, names, payments. And he told Murphy? Caleb asked. He tried. Her breath shook. That night, he didn't come home. Silence folded around the room. Danny looked between them, jaw tight. Caleb broke it first. Where are the ledgers now? Eleanor blinked. Gone. Taken from our cabin before I could hide them. But I kept the list of names. Wrote them in the hem of my shawl. Caleb glanced at the shawl draped over a chair. Snow-stained, frayed, but intact. A hiding place no thief would think twice about. You and your children, he said, voice clipped, are targets so long as Murphy thinks you know anything worth burying. Eleanor nodded once. Slow, afraid, resolved. I didn't want to burden you with it. You didn't, Caleb cut in. You warned me. Before she could speak again, a faint knock sounded at the door. Too soft for trouble. Too early for Murphy. Too tired to be a threat. Caleb opened it a crack. Catherine and Martha stood on the porch, two townswomen known for tongues sharper than their sewing needles. But their face today held something different. Worry. Caleb, Catherine said, shivering in the cold. We heard the doctor was out here. Town's saying terrible things. We wanted to see the girl. Caleb stepped aside. Quiet now. She's resting. They entered, whispering prayers when they saw Emma's pale face. Martha approached Eleanor, voice a hush. Child, we brought something. She reached inside her wool shawl and produced a small oilskin packet. We found this behind the church, she whispered. Dropped, maybe hidden. Didn't know who to trust. But the name on the front. She handed it to Eleanor. The packet bore Ezra's handwriting. Eleanor's breath caught. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside. Scraps of ledger paper, a handful of names, and Ezra's last half-written note. If anything happens, trust no one. They know. Eleanor's knees nearly gave. Caleb steadied her without a word. Catherine wiped her eyes. Men like Murphy, they don't stop. You need protection. She nodded toward Caleb. And he's the only one who can give it legal. Martha elbowed her sharply. Say it plain, Catherine. Catherine huffed. Fine. You need to marry, child. Fast. Before papers disappear. Before someone finds a reason to take your kids. Eleanor's face flushed hot. I can't ask. You ain't asking, Caleb said. I'm offering. Silence hit harder than any storm. Danny's breath caught. He looked from his mother to Caleb like the world had tilted. Eleanor's lips parted. Mr. Thornton, why? Law protects wives, he said simply. Not widows, and not strays Murphy wants buried. Eleanor looked down, voice cracking. But people will think, let 'em. Caleb stepped closer. This is shelter, not sentiment. Catherine nodded firmly. Judge Hanley's in town. He'll do it before sundown. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, not rejecting, just steadying herself. Danny? She whispered. The boy swallowed. If it keeps us safe. Mama, please. Eleanor closed her eyes, then opened them again with a steadiness she didn't have 5 minutes ago. All right, she breathed. If it keeps them alive, all right. They traveled to town on foot, staying close to the trees, avoiding open ground. Judge Hanley opened the church hall, lit a lantern, and performed the ceremony in 3 minutes flat. No vows of love, no rings, just signatures. A line of ink binding protection to need. When it was done, Caleb touched Eleanor's shoulder lightly. An acknowledgement, nothing more. A small scratching noise echoed outside the hall. Judge Hanley frowned. "You expecting someone?" Caleb stepped outside. Snow fell soft, streets empty. Nothing moved. Until he looked down. A man lay slumped behind the water trough, frozen stiff, a bottle in his hand, snow covering his face. Looked like a drunk who passed out in the storm. Except the tracks around him didn't match drunken staggering. Caleb crouched, rolled the body enough to see the rope marks around the wrists, bruising on the jaw, a black eye, and worst of all, a thin cord tied around the neck in a knot men used when staging suicide. Someone had dumped him. Someone wanted it found. Someone was sending a message. Caleb stood slowly. Inside the film, church. Eleanor waited. Children pressed close. And the snow around the dead man looked freshly disturbed. This wasn't warning. This was prelude. Caleb flexed his jaw once, then twice. "They're coming," he muttered, and he walked back inside, shutting the door against the cold, and the trouble tracking their steps through the snow. Night dropped fast, turning the cabin into a lone lantern on the ridge. Caleb felt trouble before he saw it. Torches flickering through the tree line. 6 men marching with their faces covered. "Cellar, now," he said. Eleanor grabbed Emma, Danny on her heels. The root door creaked open, swallowing them in darkness just as fists slammed the front door. "Thornton!" Murphy's voice cut through the wind. "Hand over the widow. Hand over what she knows. Last chance." Caleb unbarred the door himself. Murphy blinked at the boldness. "You won't win this. Town's already turned on you." Caleb raised his rifle. "You brought fire to my land. That's your mistake." Men shifted. Torches spat sparks. One stepped forward with a rope, the same knots used on the dead man found in town. Before Murphy could bark an order, another voice sliced in. "That's enough!" The sheriff stepped from the pines, deputies flanking him. "Murphy, you and your boys are under arrest for extortion, assault, and staging a man's death." Murphy blurted, "You can't prove anything about the ledger." The sheriff's brow lifted. "Ledger? Interesting you'd mention that." Murphy realized too late. Trap sprung. He lunged for his gun. Caleb shot first, clean, knocking the weapon from his hand. Deputies tackled the crew, torches dropping into the snow with angry hisses. Within minutes, the men were bound and dragged toward town, their curses fading into the dark. Caleb closed the door. Eleanor climbed from the cellar, Emma weak but breathing, Danny gripping Caleb's coat like a lifeline. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," he said. She held out the cabin key he'd once given her. "I don't need this anymore." Caleb folded her hand around it. Danny looked up. "Sir, can we stay?" Caleb nodded once. "You're home." And for the first time, the cabin felt bigger than the storm outside. And that, dear friends, is how a hungry widow, 2 brave children, and 1 weather-worn cowboy found their way out of the storm and into something far stronger than shelter. A home built on courage, kindness, and the simple belief that folks deserve a second chance. Out on the frontier, winter can take a man's strength, but it can also reveal his heart. Caleb didn't choose to become their protector. He just refused to let good people fall through the cracks. And in doing so, he saved not only them, but perhaps a part of himself he thought long buried in the snow. If this story touched you, reminded you of an old memory, or stirred something deep and familiar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, or what moment spoke to you the most. Your support truly keeps these Western tales alive. If you enjoyed this journey, please remember to give this video a like. And if you'd like more stories of hope, courage, and the frontier spirit, consider subscribing and don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss the next chapter we ride into together. Thank you for spending this time with us. May your nights be warm, your days peaceful, and your road home always clear.